Some people understand, and some people do not. Am I responsible for either? Hello, it's February 2023. Now, a few years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, I did a video about why I would never donate to food banks. And that's a very important video that people should watch because it really goes into some detail of why there's no food shortage and no one should go hungry. And the conclusions of that, which again I talk about with independent evidence, should irate most people. Now this video, I briefly want to talk about the whole nonsense about recycling. And this does tie into virtue signaling as a form of a social justice movement, because people think they're actually doing something, doing their part, putting aside the fact that people who really buy into it are a very, very small percentage. But anyway, I digress. But I want to highlight something here. Now, in about the mid-2000s, I spoke to someone who was very high up and involved with this whole recycling program, and they told me that the whole thing's a joke. It creates jobs, extra jobs, that whatever. And they told me that pretty much all the recycling, not all of it, but pretty much all of it, ends up going to the same dump as normal trash. And I was kind of surprised, but not really. And it's a multi-billion-dollar scheme. Again, it does create some more jobs because we have people who are sorting the stuff out and everything else, and they're getting people to sort out the stuff in their own homes. Now, I'm just going to segue for a moment. A lot of municipalities, cities and towns and so forth, they have composting bins where you can throw in your food, which kind of ties into that video about there's no shortage of food, but anyway. And people give this away for free, and these corporate cities and towns and so forth end up turning it into compost and selling it back to the people, where the people could have just did it themselves. But anyway, people are lazy. And I tried telling people in the mid-2000s, what a scam this is. And, just, again, people end up saying, well, there's nothing I can do. Or they stick by, well, I'm doing my part, whether it's helping or not. It makes them feel good. Again, I've talked about feel good and everything else. But then you have the busybody version of these people who want to impose this on other people. And I've talked extensively about busybodies. Now, maybe about 10 years ago, and there's been a lot of documentaries from mainstream that have highlighted how, yes, all this recycling stuff ends up going to the same dump. And yet people still want to feel good and think, well, I'm doing my part. So what happens to it after that doesn't matter. And people are confusing, for example, localized pollution and that having an impact with, for example, weather all around the world. The weather changes on its own throughout history, today and in the future. But I digress again. So I just really want to just bring attention to this whole recycling myth. And people have these mainstream news doing these documentary type of movies showing, they put a little GPS tracker in with the recyclable trash and tracing it to dumps. They're even tracing it to being sold overseas, and literally fields, acres and acres of this trash being collected overseas and just being burnt, like in open fields. All that plastic and all that other stuff just being burnt, going into the air, locally polluting their environment. But no one really seems to care, as long as they're doing their small part. And the virtue signaling by making or trying to make people who don't buy into it guilty. Now, if you know the truth, then there's no guilt, right? So that's really why I just wanted to highlight, bring that to the attention of why I don't buy into the whole recycling nonsense. And, even people on the ground level working at these places, they know the truth. Now, some of that does get recycled. Here's the problem. The energy, the products used to recycle, the chemicals and everything else, and the cost to recycle is worse than not recycling. Like that plastic, that whatever, styrofoam, even the paper and cardboard has to be processed, and during that process, resources are being used. Electricity, for example, also the chemicals, because something has to break it down. They just don't chop it up and then melt it. And if they did just melt it, then those fumes and everything are going into the air anyway. And this is something else people don't think about. People want to disconnect themselves from the source or the end result of whatever, whether it be recycling. You can even bring this down to this whole myth about electric cars and how there's, again, acres and acres of these electric car batteries, which are not very good for the environment if you want to look at it from that perspective, sitting in fields, just rotting away, and all the chemicals inside of that. And yes, they're trying to say, oh, well, we're going to try to find a way to recycle that as well, but then we're getting back into the cost factor and everything else. So people who buy into this electric car myth, getting 200 to 400 kilometers on a charge and then spending a few hours recharging it, that electricity is coming from usually a coal plant, even a nuclear power plant. As long as they're not from their perspective, which is skewed, releasing any emissions, then they're okay with that. Let somebody else do that. And I'm not going to even get into the whole myth about the carbon emissions and everything else, but that's a different topic. You can even bring this to people's dining room table. How people, for example, they're against hunters. A hunter will hunt, say, for example, a deer. And it's sad, yeah, and a lot of hunters, they realize that they're taking a life of an animal. But at least they go out and hunt for the meat, and they utilize the skin and everything else. Nothing goes to waste. I'm putting aside these cowards who are trophy hunters, but anyway, it's a different topic. So people will eat a steak, let someone else raise the animal and kill the animal, but be against, for example, hunters. Again, they're diverting responsibility. As long as they're doing their part, and then we get into the whole nonsense of veganism and everything else, which I've talked about in other videos as well. Anyway, again, I'm not coming down on anyone, and I'm not telling people what to say, think, or do. That's totally up to them, up to you. Just things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.